Hey guys, good evening. Thanks for joining. We're going to be talking this evening about automated versus manual accessibility testing. Understanding the difference, understanding why we need both if we're striving for any kind of accessibility compliance, most commonly to the WCAG standards, but understanding the role that automation tools can provide to a point, and then looking at the gap. All right, understanding where automation tools are not going to serve you and where you need to step up manually. All right, so irrespective of the tools you're using, the most you're going to get from automation coverage-wise is around 50 to 60% detection of all potential accessibility violations. Now, that may vary again depending on the standard that you are assessing compliance against, right? So a single, AA, or AAA. But as a rule of thumb, at least 50% of these potential violations you are only going to find when you are manually assessing your application. So quite simply, you have to have an approach that covers automation and that allows you to undertake manual assessment of your application as well. All right, so we're going to look at the two of those. We're going to look at these with reference to 2.2 now. That's the latest version of the WCAG standard. And then we'll start to talk about how you can report on these in a joined up manner for your stakeholders. All right, so just a bit of a recap on the standards themselves then. So there are a number of these, depending on your location, depending on your industry. There are a number of different standards. Some of these are very government-led, government-focused, or federal, certainly in the US. So Section 508 and the ADA, both US-based laws or standards. And then if we come the other side of the pond, more on the European side, we have UK-specific things, for example, so the Equality Act of 2010. We have a British standard for web accessibility, 8878. We have European standards, so the accessibility standard, but also more recently, the European Accessibility Act. That was something that came into being in 2019, but won't be fully enforceable until 2025. So people have got a nice 6-year window, well, not much left now, a 1-year window maybe, to get to grips with that and to be compliant with that. Again, if you're in the kind of government, public sector space. But the fact remains that almost all of these, I think all of these, it's fair to say, in one form or another, still point back to the WCAG as the single form of truth. Okay. Now, most of these will be referring to the standard version 2.1, which is now 6 going on 7 years old. Some of them in due course will start to make more intended reference to 2.2. Now, the last time we hosted a webinar on accessibility, 2.2 wasn't live yet. That was due to come in April 23, and it eventually arrived a year ago in October 23. And as always, there's a version in draft, version 3. But yes, in one way or another, all of these country-based standards, in whatever format they are, whether they're a federal law, or a civil rights law, or a European Act, a British web standard, they all make reference to WCAG as the source of truth. So probably best, when you are looking at your application, that you do likewise. It makes sense. You've probably got all bases covered in that respect. They all share a common goal, of course, and that's to make the websites, your content, universally accessible to a complete range of users. All right, so to make electronic and information technology accessible to people with disabilities, so all users. Okay, no exclusion there. There we go. So that's why WCAG now 2.2 becomes our focus. We start to dive a little deeper into the standard. It has a very hierarchical structure. Okay, so WCAG begins life with these ideas of principles. So there are 4 of them. The principle of being perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. As you start to drill down under each of these principles, you have a series of related guidelines. And then if you drill down further, and this is then at the level at which we test or we assess these things within guidelines, you have individual success criterion they're referred to. So the individual checks at that stage. So the principle of being perceivable may have many guidelines, and those many guidelines may have one or many success criteria within them. So very quickly, if we look at AAA standard WCAG, all of a sudden immediately you're looking at a collection of over 85, pushing 90, 95 success criteria, things that need to be checked. All right, so let's just touch on these 4 principles. So perceivable, so information and user interface components must be presentable to users in a way that they can perceive, they can understand this UI component. Users must be able to perceive the information being presented. It can't be invisible to all of their senses. Okay. Operable, components and navigation must be operable. You must be able to operate the interface, so it can't require any kind of interaction that would not be possible for certain groups of users. Okay, so everyone has to be able to operate that web application as intended. The principle of being understandable, so information and the operation of the interface itself must be understandable. So users must be able to understand the information as well as the operation of the UI. The content or the operation of the web app cannot be beyond their understanding. Okay. And then finally, being robust. So content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies, screen readers and the like. So users must be able to access the content as technologies advance. So as technologies and user agents evolve, the content should remain accessible. So that element of future-proofing that content. Okay. So 2.2 came along in October 23. 2.1 was kind of 5 going on 6 years at this point. 2.2's not brought a huge increase in additional checks. That's the interesting thing. And it has a slightly different focus. So 2.2 brings in 9 new success criteria. 2.1 introduced 17 at the time, back in 2018. 2.1 at the time was very focused on the mobile experience and low vision accessibility, so more of a focus on visual impairments. 2.2 has a different angle, so it's focused more so on cognitive and motor disabilities. Okay, so we're talking potentially more about these dragging movements, drag and drop, things that you would typically do with a mouse, for example. So it's got a slightly different focus, a focus on cognitive and motor disabilities. And as such, it only brings in 9 additional checks. Okay. Interestingly, what it does bring in as well is the idea of accessible authentication. So, the debate has raged on for many years about the use of things like CAPTCHA as part of an authentication process, and the simple fact that it's just not accessible for people with certain impairments. And so 2.2 now starts to consider that as a specific entry, which is great. So the 9 checks themselves, so we start to talk about focus appearance. There's a minimum and an enhanced check. So quite simply, enhancing focus indicators visibility with stricter requirements, particularly for high contrast mode users. Dragging movements, as we just talked about, so providing alternatives for dragging actions like touch gestures for users who have difficulty performing those tasks. What it tends to be with those types of actions is that to do it successfully, you have to click in a very specific location and you have to drag and drop to a very finite, very specific location. So that's a controlled action that is very difficult for some people to be able to perform. Okay. Target size, so there's a minimum target size. So touch targets, buttons, for example, we're saying now at least 24 by 24 pixels to reduce errors when interacting with smaller page elements. Accessible authentication, we just talked about. So users can authenticate without requiring a cognitive test. So without remembering passwords, without picking traffic lights out or motorbikes out or bunny rabbits out from a grid of 9 images in a capture form, none of which are accessible. Okay. Redundant entry, so preventing users from having to re-enter information they have already provided unless absolutely necessary, like for instance in security purpose instances. And then visible controls, so ensuring that controls are visible, like buttons, they remain present unless they are hidden for a valid reason until another action reveals them. Okay, so not a huge amount of additional checks, again focused on cognitive and motor disabilities, different focus from 2.1 6 years ago, but it's good. This is how we see the standards starting to evolve and to target different user bases with different kind of impairments and disabilities. Okay, so when it comes to looking at tools that can support your automation testing, then, so let's have a quick roundup of some very popular common examples here. So we have Axe from DQ Systems, we have Wave, we have Google Lighthouse, we have Accessibility Insights by Microsoft, we have Pally, we have Site Improve, we have Tenon.io, and we have SortSite by PowerMapper, for example. You can Google it, ask GPT, it's going to give you a wide range of which, the chances are that these are going to be some of the answers that are returned to you. But I tend to think of these, again, none of these specifically, but accessibility tools in one of two camps. Either they are a tool that can assist you in your accessibility testing of your application on a manual basis. So maybe you are looking at a particular page on your site, and some of these are probably going to be offered as browser extensions, plugins, and as you're there looking at your page on the site, it can probably run a scan for you on that single page and return you a list of potential violations. And then there are those which I think of more as the kind of accessibility checks that you can incorporate within an existing functional automated test. So you're on an e-commerce website, for example, you already have a test that traverses a number of pages on the website. It goes to the home page, it searches for a product, it picks a product from a product display page, it adds it to cart, it fills out an address, it completes a shipping form, a billing form, payment method, etc., etc. And at the end of it, you get some kind of order confirmation. Now, some of these tools, you will be able to incorporate them within that test. So as your automated test, regardless of framework, whether it's a Selenium, Playwright, Cypress, regardless of engine, as it traverses those individual pages of the site, it can run a check, return you a list of results for that particular page, amalgamate them together and push it to some kind of report, so you can see a kind of holistic report for that accessibility run within your automation run. So two, very similar uses, but essentially some of these tools you're using as you drive your manual assessing, and some of these tools you're using simply to run as part of your CI build and then look at the results when you come in the next day. Regardless, any of these tools is still, if there are, there are 87, 90 something checks against the AAA level of the WCAG 2.2 standard, at best, 40 to 50% of those are possibly detectable with the use of some kind of automation tool, however you run that automation tool. So this accounts for why you still have a large focus on needing to be able to support this manual accessibility testing. All right, so these tools in whatever format will give you some quick wins. They will certainly allow you to do or provide a more consistent, repeatable accessibility regression cycle, if you like. It's something that you can continuously scan, but they're not going to find everything for you. Simple as that. So we've touched on this on previous sessions, but just basically looking at what can and can't be automated. All right. So as you'd expect, the more programmatic stuff can generally be checked with the use of automation or scanning tools. All right. So we're looking at things like hierarchy relationships. We're looking at ARIA, roles, states, properties, best practices, potentially color contrast. And then the accessible naming of your page elements, right? Whether it's a form, a link, a button, a span, whatever it is, a drop-down list, a radio button. They're all things that can usually be assessed to some degree. And again, that's another point. Some tools will give you partial, but not potentially complete coverage for a certain success criteria. So just because something may be assisted by automation, it may still need to be manually checked as well for completeness. And then you have things that definitely can't, and these are certainly things that are going to fall into the camp of needing to be manually assessed, right? So focus order is a big one. So understanding the flow through the page, especially if we're driving that with a keyboard sometimes as well. Error identification, and then keyboard support on custom controls. Screen reader testing, of course. So how does some of these assistive technologies actually present or play back your content to you? And then, of course, what about ATAG? So we're so often focused on WCAG for good reasons, but ATAG is a subsection of that, if you like, that actually many people are not aware of. So ATAG is more about the accessibility of content authoring tools themselves. So if you're building a CMS, for example, ATAG is going to tell you that both the experience of using your CMS tool to build content, to put content on your site, the experience of using that itself has got to be suitably accessible for different types of users. But also the content that it then generates to publish to your site has also got to be suitably accessible for end users. So ATAG is something that, in all honesty, we only became more aware of quite recently. So it led us down another path of investigation. And again, it does relate to WCAG. It is a subset of that. But it's something that not many people are talking about. And it has to be assessed in a slightly different way. Not every kind of automation tool is going to support that as specifically as it does the WCAG checks. So just something to be mindful of there if you are building a CMS to create content for your site, your application. You're going to want to school yourself on what the ATAG compliance rules look like. So let's, before we start looking at some real-world examples and how we can do this, let's talk about the variety of approaches to testing, accessibility testing there could be. Now we're focusing more on the combination of automation with manual here, but the idea, the remaining effort, the manual, what it's going to take to get over the finish line to be compliant, right? Because when you consider the fact that if you are going, most people are probably looking at AA to start with, and I can tell you that's between 55 and 60 checks. If you then start looking at AAA as your level for compliance, you're looking at upwards of 85 checks. 85 checks on every single page of your application. All right, that's the reality. That's the scope of what you're up against. It's time consuming and it's hard work to do it properly. And of course, it deserves to be done properly. So I'd encourage you to start thinking about the end game here. All right, because it should be much more than just trying to get a compliance logo on the website. There are different ways, different flavors of objective here. Okay, so is it simply the quickest path to a compliance logo for WCAG 2.2 AA, for example? I'd actually argue that more of a measured, achievable rate of user experience enhancement, improvement, with a commitment to continued auditing of your application as part of your development and testing process. In much the same way, if you run a lighthouse check on your website, it's going to give you 4 or 5 different scores. And again, we've said this on previous webinars. There's no point just obsessing about the numbers and the scores you get back. You want to look at the information you get back and then decide how you can use that to improve your application, improve your user experience. It's not going to be quick. No one expects it to be quick. But there are ways in which you can prioritize the right things, test the right things, and prioritize the fixes of the right things in a way that is most meaningful and has the most positive effect on your end users. All right. You've got to consider your timescale, your budget. You've got to plan this in advance, and you've got to think about the skills on your team as well. Do you have the right people to do this? There's a reason why external accessibility consultants and audits are a thing, why they exist, and why you can hire them if you need them. But certainly quick and cheap is not an option when it comes to properly tackling accessibility to any level of any standard. Now, if we just focus on the testing itself, there are different approaches. Okay, there's an approach that says you could do it on a timely basis. So you could do a scan of your site, both incorporating automation and manual testing every 3 months, quarterly. That could be your commitment to trying to improve your application's accessibility. That's one option. And for many people, that would be way more than they're currently doing. So it's not a bad option. It's just one option. You could take an approach, more of a regression testing approach, where you are building, developing, releasing new features, and every time you do that, you do some concentrated accessibility testing around that new feature. Hopefully your delivery team will learn lessons from previous cycles of development and how to always build with design and build with accessibility in mind going forward. So as a process, that can become easier and more fluid, a much smoother process when everyone learns what's involved. But every time you do that, you can have a concentrated cycle of accessibility regression tests to make sure that things that were previously problematic and had fixes introduced haven't regressed, haven't broken again with the latest, delivery. So that's another option. And then another pragmatic option is to look at your application metrics and understand where most of your users are spending time on your site. It's the 80-20 rule, right? Now, this doesn't get you your compliance in that sense, but it's a very pragmatic way to introducing accessibility improvements to your site in a way that your users are going to appreciate. So look at your site, look at your flowchart, your user flows on your website, and understand where the majority of your users are spending their time, and start with that. Right, start with those pages and work to the level of the standard and introduce those fixes. Again, a very reasonable way of approaching your testing. So these are just some of the options. Of course, the big bang approach, and the one that probably no one really wants to consider, is starting at the beginning and working all the way through to the end. You've got 4 principles. You've got multiple guidelines within those principles and multiple checks or success criteria within those. Now, you could start at the beginning and you can work through to the end. You could have an extensive test cycle followed by an extensive development cycle. And maybe if you've never done any of this before, maybe that's where you start. It's certainly not going to be the way you want to continue working going forward. You're going to want more of an agile, iterative process. But you've got a variety of options out there. Just finally, to highlight something that has also come up in conversations recently, and we come to understand that different parts of the standard are more or less relevant to different user bases for a variety of reasons. So we have, certainly in the UK, across the world, I'm sure, many prominent charities supporting people with disabilities who are impacted differently by parts of the standard or the things that it's trying to improve. So what I mean by that is that, of course, there are a whole subset of people whose primary impairment or disability would be vision-based, visual impairments, as opposed to people that have more of a cognitive or a motor disability or a motor impairment. And we talked about that. So version 2.1 was about mobile and visual, more so. 2.2 now is more about cognitive and motor disabilities. And so these different parts of the standard, or these different versions of the standard, have a different impact, or the things that people fix as a result of testing their applications against these parts of the standard, they have a different impact, and they are weighted differently to people with different types of disabilities. So when you look at your application, is there a way that you can possibly channel that knowledge? If you are the RNIB, for example, primarily, of course, you're working with people that have a visual impairment. So those parts of the standard are probably going to be of a higher weighting to you when you're assessing your application. Of course, it's not to say that you don't tackle the other parts of the standard, but when it comes to a pragmatic working approach to getting through these and raising the bugs and delivering the change, for your organization with your users, there's going to be maybe a combination of these different approaches we talked about, but one should certainly become a bit more apparent in terms of the way that you may want to start doing this. And then certainly, as I say, the more change you introduce, the more compliant you will become. It may take a long time, may take a while till you're completely compliant, but what you're doing is enhancing your user experience as you go, and you have that continued commitment to accessibility improvements to the benefit of all of your users, and that can only be a good thing. Okay, so let's start looking at the results of some of our automated accessibility testing. So I've run a few audits today. We're going to be looking at the testing of our .com website. Okay, so I've got a history of some runs that I've executed today. What I can see in TestEvolve Halo here is a run card, shows the latest information. So in the run that I've just done, we completed 22 automated accessibility checks. They most commonly refer to a page within the site. So 22 pages that we've crawled across, and that's returned a total of 53 violations. We get the breakdown there: 3 critical, 4 serious, 43 moderate, and 3 minor. That was run on a Chrome browser, etc. So if I want to start digging a little deeper with my automation and understanding where these failures actually are and how I can get to quickly resolve them, these kind of reports are going to tell you how to do that. So I can see here that my scenario name, my test case, if you like, audit or .com, it's registered as a failure. So simply from an accessibility testing point of view, if you return any violations, certainly with the TestEvolve Spark integration with AXCore from DQ Systems, we are going to consider that a failed accessibility test. There's information for you to digest, and there's something for you to address within your application. But I can click in here and I can start to understand where these problems may be. So you're going to see reference to our feature, auditing the .com site. This is in Cucumber and BDD terms. Our scenario, audit.com, we can see it's failed. And there's my given step, my BDD given step. So I've simply said, given I run audits across the .com website, and when I execute these checks, I give them a label, and that label denotes the page that the check is being undertaken on. And you can see that here, the homepage, the overview, reporting, etc. We get the full URL, and then we also get the breakdown of the returned severities for that check on that page. So we have it on a page-by-page basis here. So you can talk in those terms with your developer. You can say on the home page, I found 1 critical, or on the overview page, no criticals, but we've got 1 moderate. So, that's one way in which you can, talk about these issues. But let's start drilling down. We want to start understanding what these problems actually are, and we'll take a look at the actual site, and we'll see what we've got to pick up on. So we've got some criticals here. This is on the homepage of our .com site. So here is our homepage. All right, we'll look at this as we go through. We've got some criticals with regards to missing alt tags more often than not. So images not having alternate text but needing it. We have also got some serious issues or a serious violation when it comes to color contrast. So we'll take a look at that. And another serious issue there when it comes to links having discernible text. So if I look very quickly at these, I think I recognize the structure of the site and I know what these are likely to be, but we'll just confirm that that's the case. So let's look at this one. For example, pick one at random. My belief at the moment is that this is probably going to be a carousel at the bottom of the homepage that contains images that link out to our blog content. So let's just try and follow that through. So we've got a reference to an image source, a URL that contains exploring the realms of test automation frameworks. So if I come over to my homepage, we don't have too many images on this page, but let's go right to the bottom. There we go. Let's have a look. So those are some of our most recent blog articles. It's going to probably see all of them within the carousel, even though I can't. But let's just have a scoop through. I think this is probably the one I'm looking for. So if I let's start up DevTools, and let's just do an inspect on this image here. There we go, image source, as I saw, there we go, exploring the realms of test automation framework. So this is the image. My automated accessibility test is telling me that it doesn't have that alt tag, essentially. The reports will also, we've got multiples of those, probably all the ones in the carousel, but I've got links out here to the Axe University from DQ Systems. If I want to learn a little bit more specifically about this type of violation, why it's an issue, this is where I come to do that. Okay, and normally where I come straight away is to the bottom right hand part of the screen, and it's going to give me a really nice summary. It really tells me everything I need to know to get me to help me prioritize it, have that conversation with developers. So quite simply, this is going to affect blind people or deaf blind people. It's a violation against the single A level of both the 2.0 and the 2.1 WCAG standards. It's also a violation of the section 508, so for you guys in the US, with the federal laws over there. And then we see reference here to the explicit success criteria. That's going to roll up to a guideline, which is going to roll up to a principle, and these will become more apparent when we duck into the manual accessibility testing in a short while. So it's a really good section here to just give you a quick summary and tell you why it's a problem. Let's just have a quick skim through. So we saw alt tags. We also saw color contrast issues. I straight away looking at these, I know what these are as well. So if I come back to our homepage, scooch up again, and I come down to about here. It's just got some resizing issues going on there. We've got 1, 2, 3 sections here for our guides, and that I'm reasonably confident documentation, articles and videos is going to be, oh actually no, I'm completely wrong there. There you go, took that for granted. These are referenced to these sections here. There we go. So we've got these headings here. Now at first glance it's interesting, it wouldn't appear to be a color contrast issue, but this could well be a font weighting or a size of font issue as well. So that's the issue that it's telling me about on that section of the homepage. If I want to understand about color contrast, I can come here. Let's just come to the final issue then. So there's another serious issue with discernible text. That's what I was expecting here. So we can look at these. We've got a link out to our GitHub page. We've got a link out to our blog there. And we've got a link out to our video guides. And I suspect that's these sections on the site here that we just... these ones here. So that's how you can start to draw the parallel between what the reports are telling you, understanding why it's a problem and why you need to prioritize it and the level of prioritization you need to get to. If you need to go and gather screenshots from your site to support a bug that's going to be raised in Jira, then of course you can do that. But this is all on the automated side. Now, just to give you just a bit about our journey here. So if we look back at some of the automated accessibility testing here, actually on our Halo reporting platform itself. Right now, everything's green essentially, so we routinely run 2 sets of tests, 18 checks each. One of those is executed in light mode, one is executed in dark mode. And as you'll see, we are thankfully not returning any violations right now. That's because we've done some work to address those. If I were to go back, let's say 2-3 months ago, it was a different picture, right? Because it's something we've been working on. If I go back here to say almost 100 days ago, 2nd of July, we were running 17 checks then, not 18, but that returned 10 violations on that particular sweep. We are looking here on just in light mode, and it was 10 minor violations. There you go. So some of our pages were violation free at that point, and some of them weren't. Some of them just had some minor violations, which I think all tended to be around duplicate component IDs. So that's since been addressed, and we're now at a place where we continue to run those checks. We're returning 0 violations, and our commitment is to keep doing that and making sure we stay on top of that as we release new features. So it just goes to show that you can go on this journey. The automated accessibility side of things can be a reasonably quick win to making a real positive first impact on addressing some of these violations. Okay, excuse me. As we said at the beginning, though, of all the violations, if you're thinking about the AAA standard for WCAG, the most you can hope to target with any kind of automation is around 45, 50, a fraction over 50% maybe. So despite the fact that we are clear on the 36 checks that we are making, that's maybe only half of what I could expect to find when I start to look at this manually as well. And just to touch on, so I opened up DevTools there as well. So what it's nice to do sometimes as well with your automated checks is to draw a parallel with what something like a lighthouse check would return you. So you can use lighthouse checks within DevTools. You can scan it on a page basis, and of course you will be expecting to see the same type of information that you're going to see here. So it just starts to give you this joined up picture of how automation works with some kind of manual scanning tools, but it's all ultimately telling you the same information. And what you can go away and do then is potentially raise a bug with your development team. So coming back here where I had 10 violations, I can click into there. And where I have these violations, I can use the Jira integration to raise a bug. The nice thing here is it's going to do the summarizing of that information for you. It's going to tell you the page, the URL. But when this hits your Jira backlog, it's going to contain a ticket with a URL right back to this report. So your front-end developer can then come straight back here for the source of truth as regards those violations. So that's just the start point, really. So this is how we start to have a view of our automated accessibility. Right now, we're going to look at the other 50%, right? We now need to consider, how do I start looking for those violations that I can't expect to pick up with any kind of automated scanning, whether that's a manual lighthouse check, whether that's a fully automated suite of page-by-page checks within an existing functional automation test. You've now got to look at the work we do manually, and only by doing that, bringing them together, you can now start to give your stakeholders that overall accessibility picture. And start to move quite aggressively towards becoming more compliant to a certain level. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so looking at the options that we have now for capturing and tracking our manual accessibility testing, right? So essentially the other 50% that we can't expect to automate. So new within Test Evolve Halo now. We've had previous webinars that talk about our exploratory run capture and capabilities there. This is a similar concept, but we can now offer the creation of a manual accessibility test run as something that you can work with and display alongside all of your other testing data in Halo. It works in a similar way. So we work with the idea of labels, which denote a sense of purpose for a particular test run. So let's just give here a demo label for the purposes of creating a new run. Now this is an accessibility run, so really the only thing for a user creating a new run to do right now is choose the WCAG level that is going to be relevant for the testing that they want to do. And then you have an optional description, so let's call this a 6 monthly review off the top of my head. And then we create run. And now we have this new, in this case, a AAA. We are now measuring to level 2.2 of the WCAG standard, and here is now my manual accessibility testing run within Halo. Okay, so I'm just going to flick over to one that I have already been building. So we looked here earlier at our automated accessibility testing. Now what I want to do is bring alongside my manual accessibility testing, so we really get the power of all of our accessibility auditing in a centralized view. Accessibility, automated and manual together. This becomes a view that you can share. Of course, if you want to talk about it as stand-ups, then it's a great vehicle to do that. But let's start to look at the manual side of things. Okay, so we talked about the level. So just for purposes of demonstration, we're looking at AAA here against a 2.2 standard. And the first few things we start to see where we actually have some results from some manual accessibility testing is the idea of some passes, some failures, and remainder of testing still to be done for us to have been through all of the checks for a AAA audit, if you like. We also see reference there to some of the checks that for whatever reason may not be applicable. And also some of the checks that for whatever reason we've decided not to do. Okay, now I will make the point, this is purely a demonstration run. We ourselves, for our website, for the Halo reporting platform itself, our GitHub documentation, we are very much on that accessibility journey ourselves. So we're trying to make great strides towards becoming more and more compliant. And we'll be using this methodology ourselves to improve our own products. So as a run within Halo, we can see this is an open run. Okay, so this was created on the 9th of October. And so I can click into this. And again, if you're at all familiar with anything on Halo, if you've seen our previous webinars, everything works on this click through, this drill down, this expansion basis. Okay, so this is the run view we see of our manual accessibility test run. Okay, so .com audit, that's my label, that's the purpose of my run. We can see that in the breadcrumbs there and the location of our data in terms of where we're storing it within Halo. And once I've started to get some results, and we'll look at these in a second, we're going to start to see some core metrics along the top here. So I'm currently at a kind of 44% passing against my AAA suite of checks. Amongst that, I've currently got 9 success criteria that are deemed to be failing. And then just a reminder here of the standard and the level. If I want to add a further description to my run, I can do that here. And then just some metrics about the run itself, when it was started and when it was last updated. Again, with any run in Halo, we have the idea of run history as well. Okay, so this is just a single run right now, but if I do another audit in 3 months' time or 6 months' time or next sprint, whatever that frequency is going to be, if I use the same label, I can start to build up a history of these runs, and we can flip between these runs. And if there's a desire there to make comparisons from one release to the next or one sprint to the next, then we start to be able to do that with this build up of run history. Now, looking at the alignment with WCAG itself. Okay, so 2.2 is the standard, as we say, and we created a run that selects AAA. At the top, we mentioned previously, this is a very hierarchical thing, and we talked about it in the slides earlier. We have these four fundamental principles of accessibility assessment. Okay, so is it perceivable? Is it operable? Is it understandable? Is it robust? We can click into any of these now, and we start to break it down. So if I start to open up each of these principles, and there's a third one, understandable, and then there's a fourth one, robust. So what it's going to present to me here is going to be relevant to the level that I selected when I was creating my run. Okay, so if all I'm interested in is single A checks, then I will have a condensed list that, of course, doesn't include AA and AAA. Okay, so it's going to depend upon how you build your run to start with. Each of these guidelines themselves is then broken into really the lower or the lowest level of assessment at this point. This is what we call the success criteria. And everything we are tracking against, so from numbers of failed criteria and the pass rate here, it's all governed by the scope of the assessment you set yourself, by the selection of the standard, and then by the statuses you ultimately assign to each of these success criteria as you move through them and you assess them against your application. All right, so if I just dig into one here, I click on the 1.1.1, the non-text content. As we drill down, we then get all of the information we need in perfect alignment with the WCAG website as a single source of truth. We have links out here if you want to understand in any more detail about what a particular principle, guideline or success criteria is. Of course, we step out to the WCAG website as the source of truth. And what we also have here as well, we've talked a lot about automated accessibility as well today, but what's important for people to understand is that as you're going through, looking at these criteria, looking at your application, it's very useful to know that if you are using any kind of automation at all, be that the Test Evolve, ACTS, accessibility integration, or something like Lighthouse, anywhere where there is a degree of automation, we've made it very clear here that these criteria that are marked with this assisted by automation flag can well be partially and in some cases fully covered for assessment of compliance. So 1.1.1 is definitely a success criteria which to some extent can be assessed with the aid of automation tools. Okay, that's never to say you don't check it manually, but when you're looking at prioritizing your manual effort, you may want to start with these success criteria that aren't assisted by automation, because you are absolutely going to have to do those manually. All right, so it's just to give you an indication of where you may already have some coverage. And certainly when we were looking here earlier, when we were looking at our automated run with 22 checks and 53 violations, clearly we've already got some coverage, we've already got some feedback, we've already possibly raised some bugs off the back of this run. So now that I'm coming over here to do my manual assessment, it may be prudent, it may make sense for me to focus on other areas first of all, but that's your decision to make. Okay, so each of these criteria will be marked for the level that they represent. So non-text content is a single A level success criteria. We have the links out there as well. And then we have here the steps that you as the tester will need to consider when you are looking at your application. All right, so this is what we call a guided walkthrough of that manual testing process. Ultimately, you need to check every page of your application for each of these success criteria, depending upon the level that you set when you created this run. And then when you've looked at your application, we'll look at a couple of examples in a second, you then have the option to add your own assessment notes here. That can be whatever you want. It can talk about the pages you've covered. Have you looked at it in light mode, in dark mode? You can raise questions here, of course. It's just your chance to capture notes and talk about your coverage. Most importantly, tracking what it is you've done and then having an audit and a history of that to look back upon. There's every chance that lots of people are doing accessibility testing, but our experience tells us that people just aren't tracking it and auditing it particularly well, or don't have the ability to look back at a point in time and see what the state of play was back at that point. So this is designed to allow you to do just that. Ultimately, when you've made that determination of your application on every page, you have a picker here where you can assign essentially a pass or fail status for that individual success criteria. All right, so passed or failed, fairly clear cut, of course. If any one of these criteria is not quite met, you should consider that a failure. If everything is okay, then of course you can mark it as passed. To be clear again, at this stage, this is not a statement of compliance at all. This is a tool to allow you to get as close as that as you can. Okay. Everything will start life in a not started status. Okay. And there are, of course, going to be things that are just not applicable on your site. All right, so it's not that it's not part of the standard, and it's not that it's not important to certain users with certain disabilities, but if that feature or that type of feature simply doesn't exist on your site, then of course you can mark it as not applicable. And what that's going to do is actually going to reduce it from the progress markers, from the scope of the work that you've got left to do. If it's not applicable, it's no longer a check that you need to make. Okay, and then finally we have a won't do status, and that simply exists to allow people a somewhat flexible approach in their testing. If, for example, you're doing your first ever audit of your web application, and for whatever reason, maybe you are just going to focus on the second fundamental principle. You're just going to focus on its operability. Okay, maybe, and that's first and foremost, that's around keyboard navigation, potential seizures from screen refreshes, flashes, input modalities. For whatever reason, maybe you're just focusing on one principle. So the rest of the success criteria, if you were selecting a AA level for your run, for example, you can mark as won't do, and that's going to help you set the scope of your work. Okay. So just to wrap up, let's have a look at a few of these. So we'll start in perceivable. Let's have a look at time-based media. I can see here, as we do add results against success criteria, we get this roll-up effect of the success criteria themselves with the status, which feeds into the overall pass, fail, and to-do progress for the guideline itself, so 1.1 in this case. And all of the guidelines collectively for a principle will feed in and roll up to the overall progress, pass, fail, and to-do for the principle level. And then, of course, as you can see, all of the four principles together, the sum total is going to roll into an overall run, pass, fail, and not started, or work remaining progress indicator. All right, let's start drilling down. We're going to look at section 1.2. So we're going to step into the perceivable section. We're looking at time-based media. We're going to look at a couple of example applications. We have our .com website, we have our GitHub pages, and we also have our Flare Studio application. So from our point of view, these are all things, as well as our Halo dashboards, that we need to consider from an accessibility point of view. So looking at time-based media. And again, quickly, we'll look at this from a single A versus AAA, just to understand the differences. So let's have a look. We'll start with audio only and video only pre-recorded. We step into that. It currently has a non-started status. All right, let's explore a bit more. So for pre-recorded audio only and pre-recorded video only in media, the following are true. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the nth degree of detail, but we provide the steps here for you to make that assessment, and the steps out of this to the WCAG websites to understand in more detail. And it's important that you do, and we'll show for why in a second. But so I know that on our applications, we do have a mixture of video content without audio, and also some video content that does have audio. We don't have any audio only content. So as I start to go through this, I'm looking for predominantly video focus. So identify pre-recorded video only content. Provide alternatives for video only content. Okay. in basic terms, ensure that either a text transcript or an audio description is available for all pre-recorded video content. Now, what you see on the side, there is definitely some overlap with some of these. Okay, we also have the idea of captions. So we'll look at these. So 1.2.1 is a single A level check. 1.2.2 is a single A level check, and then we get into 1.2.3 single A. Then we've got some live format. Now, we don't have any live content either, so actually this is a quick one for me. So I'm going to come through and I'm going to mark this as not applicable because we don't have any live audio or video content on any of those applications. So let's just rule out the live checks to start with. So we'll mark that as not applicable. But as we start coming through these, so if I now step on to, let's have a look at 1.2.5. So 1.2.5 is really an expansion of these, but it starts to step up a level to AA. All right, 1.2.6 now talking about the provision of sign language. Well, that only comes into play with the AAA level for WCAG 2.2. So of course, as you've set your run up, you're only going to be presented with the appropriate criteria of these that match your run selection. So I think, and probably the approach that we'll take, you want to look for making your assessments at single A level first of all, maybe applying the fixes and then moving up AA. And then potentially, if you go towards AAA, take it in chunks and introduce the fixes as you go, and keep testing and releasing fixes on that basis. Let's have a quick look at our example applications. And before we do that, let's just get some clarity on some of these. So 1.2.1, okay, so audio only and video only. All right, I'm just focusing on some particularly poignant parts of how we get an understanding of the real focus of this. So an example of pre-recorded video with no audio. Okay, well, we have such an example here. So this is on a page on our .com site. We have a video here, no audio, and it's just designed to show you what the run configuration process within Flare looks like. No captions, no audio, as you can see, no transcript. All we have at best is a 3-step text on the right-hand side that in very, very simple terms discusses what's happening there. But actually, section 2, choose your run options, well, that's comprised of multiple things here. It's choosing the test type, the target, the platform, the browser type, the browser options. So, of course, we could go into a lot more detail. But just coming back here, so the purpose of such a transcript is to provide an equivalent to what is being presented visually. For pre-recorded video, authors have the option to provide an audio track. The purpose of said audio is to be an equivalent to the video. All right. So, why do we have to look at this manually? Well, some automated tools may be able to tell, that there is captions or there is a transcript at best, just the presence of that. Most of them won't. But what they certainly won't be able to do, when captions and transcripts do exist, is assess the suitability of them in connection with the content of the video. So most tools won't provide any automation support here at all. So this is essentially a manual testing focus area for that very reason. Okay. Now we see some variations on this. So 1.2.2 is a slightly different focus. This is about captions. So obviously adding audio transcript or audio commentary is probably for people with visual impairments. Adding visual captions on the screen, of course, would be for people with hearing impediments. Okay, so it considers both groups of people, of course. So the intent of this success criterion is to enable people who are deaf or hard of hearing to watch synchronized media presentations. Okay, so variations on a theme, but for different audience members, if you like. And then moving on to 1.2.3, and of course this is just moving along with what we have down here, 1.2.3. And this is where it gets interesting, all right, because it does concede. And this is where you're going to have to look at the detail to really, do the job well and ensure that you are providing your stakeholders with the correct view of compliance, you're going to have to become experts in some of these areas because there won't be many people in your organization that do have this knowledge. But as you test this more and more, you are going to become that SME. But it says here very clearly 123, 125 and 128 overlap somewhat with each other. So despite the fact this is a standard, there is still the potential for overlap. So you have to look at them individually and you have to look at them as a whole as well. This is to give the author some choice at the minimum conformance level, i.e. single A, and to provide additional requirements at higher levels, so AA, AAA. At level A, success criteria 1, 2, 3, authors simply have the choice of providing either audio description or full text alternative. If they wish to conform at AA level, they must provide an audio description, a requirement already met if they chose that alternative to 1.2.3. So I think you see where I'm coming from. Even as a standard, these things are not always easy to interpret. Okay, you can very clearly see why there's a large element of manual assessment when it comes to this. Now, just looking at our other applications. Okay, so looking at our GitHub pages, we have video content here that does have audio, but what we also have here as well is probably a more considered approach to having provided that same content with on a text basis as well. So I would probably consider this, in terms of assessing this, I'd consider this to be more compliant than I would this, for example. And then we have another page here as well. But ultimately, sticking closely to the guidelines, we don't have captions on this, and we truly don't have an audio transcript either. So when I'm making these assessments, I'm going through looking at my application, erring on the side of caution, as we always should do with this. I'm going to have to mark these as fail, and I can add a note simply to say that video content on .com website for Flare run configuration does not contain audio transcript or captions. So I can just save my note at the same time as marking that as a failure. Okay, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to do the same thing, of course, with these other criteria. But that's a basic introduction to something in the time-based media space. I did also create a single A version of this run just to show you how that would look slightly different at single A level. So single A, I've only got these 1, 2, 3 checks that I need to consider here. All right, very, very different from the AAA check, where we are dealing with all 9 of these potential section 1.2 success criteria. So 3 times the effort to obtain AAA compliance there. All right, moving on to another one. Okay, we're going to look now at something from principle number 2, which is the operability. There are 3 success criteria which are partially automatable. But I want to show you clearly why you have to apply some manual effort to these as well. So we're going to look at keyboard-only navigation, which is from section 2.1.1. We're going to look at focus visibility, when we are driving with a keyboard, how visible objectively, or subjectively, we should say, is that focus visibility. And then we'll just look at some basics of around the sensory criteria around button sizes, which is from 2.5.5. We're going to use the test evolve Flare application as our application under test. So let's look at 2.1.1. All right, so we do see here that we have the assisted by automation. Again, to reiterate, that means that potentially if you're doing any kind of automated tool scanning, you may well have some coverage here. You may well have already seen this flagged on a test report, it's a scan report. But you need to look at it manually as well. The reason for why, okay, so automation, the tools that do give you this can certainly confirm that buttons or links are potentially reachable via the keyboard, for example. But really only a human, can can make sure or make that determination that actually the navigation through the keyboard is definitely intuitive and it's smooth and there are no barriers, etc. So this is why you need to apply some manual effort around these. Okay, so let's just have a quick look. We'll bring Flare into play. All right, so I'm just tabbing around now. I'm on the sign-in screen, so I haven't used the mouse at all yet, and I'm just tabbing around until I see a certain pattern of flow come into play. So it looks like going from a kind of logo there to the organization identifier field, the second field, the third field, probably focusing on the login button at this stage. Now, maybe the first thing I see there, if that is the case, is that there's no visual indication when it comes to that login button. That would be under section 2.4.7, but we'll come back to that. So firstly, can I sign in without using the mouse? Let's have a look. So just tabbing through. Tabbing again. Now my hope now is I can tab and probably enter to complete the login. Yeah, there we go. So technically navigable with the keyboard on that page for sure. We did see something with regards to an absence of focus visibility when we were actually on the sign-in button itself. As I say, that would be a different criteria, but let's just continue with this exploration on keyboard navigation. So again, haven't touched a mouse yet, so if I start to tab through, I've got top left project name, the directory icon. Now I've tabbed again, and actually only by now using my left and right arrows do I know where I am. There is now some focus indication visibility. So I'd be selecting a project here. Presumably if I tab one more time, I'd be on the create button. That's not active anyway, because actually I've got to go back and fill in some field information here. So let's just call this test project. We'll tab one more time. It's on a directory icon, so I'm assuming if I can enter here, there we go. I can I'm presented with my Finder window for choosing the drive in which I want to. Now this stage, of course, to be fair, I'm outside of the application. I'm within the macOS operating system, which itself is going to need to be accessible. Okay, so just going to use the mouse to close that off. So there's a question here of how selectable that drive is with the keyboard. Let's just try that again. So we hit enter. We enter that drive. I've got up arrows and down arrows to move within that. How do I get onto the open button? Good question. I think if I keep tabbing, I'm going to tab outside of that main window. Test workspace. If I click enter at that point, there we go. Okay, so I've created my path. I'm now onto my project language selector, so I'm going to select Ruby. I think if I enter that and tab and enter, I'm able to create my project by entering on the submit button. Same thing, so there definitely seems to be a lack of focus visibility on our confirmation actions. Okay, so there you go, interesting. So just continuing the journey, if I just start tabbing around. Now what we see on this screen, and this is a newer screen, okay, so it makes absolute sense to me that there's a slightly different behavior here, but it does expose some of the earlier screens in which we need to make some changes. So this is what I'm talking about with regards to clear focus visibility. So this is section 2.4.7. If I just flip back to, if we move down a bit, 2.4 navigable, 2.4.7 focus visibility. Again, it is assisted by automation, but clearly you can see why you need to look at this kind of stuff manually. Okay, so coming back to Flare. So if I keep tabbing around, so I've got my core sections: run test, test recorder, page builder. From there, it's not entirely obvious to me where it takes us, and then we start to loop back. I'm just going to open another project because I want to see some projects that has some results down here. So I'm just going to quickly step through this, so I've got some more relevant content. Again, another part of your testing process. You're going to need to, again, on a website, you're definitely going to need to expose modals and pop-ups and various different bits and pieces that aren't always there, because you'll need to assess those as well. So in this instance, I've just opened another project that gives me some results on the right hand side, so I can continue to access the visibility and the navigability. So here we go. I'm going to tab through, run test, test recorder, page builder, tab through. Now my assumption, I could be somewhere on the top, I could be within the jobs section at this point. If I keep tabbing, there we go, I eventually come into the results section. So we definitely have visibility on these guys over here. So my assumption is if I go 1, 2, 3 tabs, I've got 4, 5 tabs, 6 tabs before. So there's 2 tabs that are kind of unaccounted for in terms of highlighting what's currently the focus point. If I back tab 1, back tab 2, now I'm using the mouse now, but I could be here, I could be on this refresh button, or I could be on this create button. So it's not immediately obvious for sure, but if I go tab 1, tab 2, I'm going to assume that I'm on the create button now, so I'm going to hit enter. There you go, that's going to open that up for me. So an example here of how we start to explore, navigate in conjunction with what the standard and the success criteria are telling us on how we assess these things. And then I can go in here and I can say, well, mismatch in focus visibility, make sure I'm spelling right, ability between login page on Flare, projects, screen and home page. In general, create / confirmation buttons do not receive visible focus. There we go. Still can't spell. Terrible. Better. Right, so save that. And for now, I'm going to have to fail that check. All right, so there's a very definite reason I've assessed that manually. We looked at the navigability, the focus side of things as well. Very quickly, if we come on to 2.5 input modalities, 2.5.5, this was about target size in that sensory nature. So as I'm hovering around within Flare, I can invoke DevTools as we see here, and I can start to click on certain elements, and it will tell you some stuff about accessibility that you can use in your manual assessing. Okay, so what I'm really looking at here, a few things. It tells me this is keyboard focusable. Well, it was, because I could click enter and it did in fact invoke that action. It just wasn't visible. All right, so it has a name, it has a role of being a link. Now at the top here, what I'm interested in, it has the relative size, well, the actual size in pixels of this element. As I move around on different elements, there you go, 24 by 18. So this as a button is 114 pixels by 36. So if I come on to section 2.5.5, we're actually saying as a minimum things should be 44 by 44 pixels. So strictly speaking, this button is certainly long enough. That's fine in terms of left to right. It's possibly a little bit shy on the height side of things. So we might want to go through all of our elements like this within our applications. There you go, 170 by 33, and potentially make some adjustments on the height and dimensions of some of these elements to be able to say we are compliant with section 2.5.5. Now this is an enhanced check, so this will be AAA specific. Okay, there are I think there are, yeah, target size minimum. So 2.5.8 target size as a minimum drops you to AA standard. And it just may well be that there's a slightly different requirement there. So you've got to be familiar with all of these, but you can make the determination based upon the standard that you selected. Okay, so there's a few examples using Flare as our application under test. Okay, and then finally, a very, very common example, the use of capture. All right, something we use in places. Clearly, many other organisations with platforms and products also make use of capture. And it's essentially, ironically, to try and make sure that it's a human that's using your platform. The downside to this is for 5 different reasons, which we'll get into in just a second. It violates numerous accessibility, single, double, AAA success criteria within the standard. So let's just go through those briefly. So long story short, if you're looking to be compliant with WCAG, you're almost certainly going to have to consider an alternative to the use of capture. Okay, so it's in violation of section 1.1.1, which is non-text content level A. The conflict with capture there. Let's just open that up. The conflict with capture on 1.1.1. Let's close that. 1.1.1, there we go. Is that image-based captures will often fail, of course, to provide any adequate kind of text alternatives for users who can't see or understand this visual challenge. Okay, so if you do have capture, you wouldn't, with good faith, be able to pass this non-text content success criteria. The next thing it is in violation of, and this will be a shock to some people, I think, the number of success criteria that it does contravene. Okay, we look at 1.4.3. So contrast. Why would it be a problem for contrast? Well, the text, the images that you see in capture, of course, as I think we did just see, are often intentionally distorted to prevent bots from being able to solve it. But of course, for people with visual impairments, that's going to be a problem. Okay, adding distortion to an image of which you expect someone to be able to do something with that, a person who has visual impairments, that is not going to work for them at all. And then we come on to section 2.1.1. So it's also in violation of this. So we come into the operability 2.1, keyboard 2.1.1, keyboard itself. And the reason being, almost all capture mechanisms are going to rely on mouse-based interaction. Most of the time, you are being asked to click on multiple squares within a grid of 9 squares, for example. Something you can do with a mouse, not so good with a keyboard. So that's a problem for people with mobility impairments. And then we get specifically into 3.3.7. Let's just focus on that. Accessible authentication. There we go. 3.8. My apologies. 2 flavors of that. We have 3.8, 3.9, AA, and AAA. So this is new within the 2.2 version of the standard. Okay, so these weren't there previously, but I think this has come because of this ongoing conversation about the use of capture and the fact that it's not accessible, and so it has now its own entry within the standard within 2.2. So, and the reason with this specifically, so traditional capture methods rely on perception, so things we've talked about, distorted text or audio challenges, which can be both inaccessible to people with cognitive or sensory impairments. Okay, so that's the 4th reason. The 5th reason, we have to go into section 3.2. Let's just back it up there, predictable. So we are looking at change on request, section 3.2.5. And the reason that capture is a problem for this success criteria is that if you recycle, or the capture image itself recycles after a period of time, it can lead to an unexpected page refresh and other types of changes, visual changes on the application, if the user were to fail the challenge or the capture itself times out. So there you go, 5 different success criteria across at least 3 of the fundamental principles of the WCAG standard. for which the use of capture is going to cause the assessment of those success criteria to have to be failures. You would have to fail those success criteria if you are going to continue to use capture within your application. So certainly it's something we are looking at, but there'll be many people in the same boat, of course. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Okay, well that concludes today's webinar. Thank you again for spending your time to join us. If you do like what you've seen, if this has been in any way useful to you, please do give us a thumbs up, like and subscribe on the video and the channel. If you're looking at your tooling right now or your agile testing services, then please do consider us. Reach out to us at testevolve.com. Check out our GitHub pages for support for the product. Testevolve, the solution, is free on a fully featured 30-day evaluation, so why not give it a try? Reach out to us on email or social media. We're only too happy to field any questions that you have. Until next time, we'll see you then.